places, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Unsung. In the studio today, I have a gentleman that I never really knew that much about. And I really got to know him in the last interview we did, which you won't see because I screwed it up. So I'm going to sound like a genius today where this guy's concerned, because now I know everything. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, one of Calgary's great gentlemen and a proponent of the arts, absolutely, Doug Wong. Doug, how you doing, man?
I'm great. I'm happy to be back.
For a second time.
You see, now you can edit that.
It's Doug Wong to the reckoning.
Okay.
I so appreciate you being here, man. And I really, like I said, I didn't know that much about you previously. Mm-hmm. And then I got to know all things Doug Wong. And that was very encouraging. There's some things that I want to visit today that you and I talked about previously.
Sure.
But first of all, because I didn't know this, you were Sundae Sound and the mm-hmm. beginning of that, the entirety of that. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that to us?
Well, I managed a group called Shamish at the time, and we decided to build our own recording studio. Nigel Blackburn was the bass player. So we partnered up and set up Sundae Sound so that the group could do their own recordings. And eventually it got to the point where in order to pay bills, we would take some outside sessions. So, yeah.
You started that as the impetus for what? Just for your own sake?
Yes. Yeah. Personal studio. Yes.
Right. I was having a conversation with somebody after I learned this about Sundae Sound and you in particular. And they were, no, it was Doug Bartlett, and I said, no, that's what people think.
Oh, Rob.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was an engineer for us later on.
Right, and he might have taken it over, correct?
Yeah, he did take it over, yeah.
Right, but the cultural misunderstanding out there is that, somehow other people that came after or did other jobs were complicit in the beginning and founding of it. Oh. But that was you.
Well, myself and Nigel. Yes.
And Nigel.
Yeah.
Because I remember that place, and I'm sure a lot of you out there do as well, as kind of a holy grail, as kind of Mecca in some respects for an individual in Calgary, a musician, artist wanting to record. Sundae Sound was like, damn, if you got into Sundae Sound, man, you were doing something.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. No, it was that kind of place.
Well, we wanted it to be inclusive. So we had recording workshops there. Because a lot of the other studios had one engineer, and there's all different kinds of music, and there are people that like country, they like pop or hip hop and so on and so forth, right? So it made sense to us to find people that really loved a certain genre of music to become engineers for that style of music. So that's why we offered the recording workshops, is to train people so that they could operate the equipment and then go in and do their own sessions. Frank Lockwood was there. Jerry Proppy, who you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did some recordings there as well. Yeah.
Did he really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, that must have been before he even ventured out on his own with his own equipment.
Yeah, he has his own studio, yeah.
God, that's going back then.
Yeah, we kind of encourage people just to branch off and do their own thing, yes.
Right. Well, Jerry Proppy, because, we've only known each other now for 32 years. And that's where I got my start in recording, really, at Jerry's studio.
Cool.
And so it's interesting, the history. And so in some ways, he must really respect you guys for what you did and what you maybe taught him about how to do it as well.
You'd have to ask Jerry, but I'm glad to hear.
Oh, I'm getting Jerry in, trust me.
Okay,
yes,
great.
yes. Even if I have to handcuff him.
He's very talented. Yeah, I really admire his, musical abilities and his songwriting and everything, yeah.
Yeah. He, really, he's a staple, one of the reasons why I'm doing Unsung is not to revisit the past and not to, rehash it, but to give respect You know, an honor to those who have come before that inspired me. You know, it's also equally as much a platform to talk to new artists and young artists and how they're doing things. And that was something I was informed by you about the last time we spoke.
Oh, yeah, Calgary artists. There's a lot coming up the ranks these days.
Right. And I have to say that from that conversation, and we'll get into that, you've only pushed me deeper into the philosophers and to the theory of philosophy itself. And now I'm on to what philosophy, sort of the definition of philosophy. It's a 20-hour course.
Okay.
But I have to blame you for it.
Uh-oh.
Because you really inspired me to go, okay, I have a certain belief or I have a certain observation, right? And so am I justified in what I believe about the observation, or am I not justified in it? And or is it a combination of justification and non-justification?
Right.
And so I go about, you know, trying to figure that out. And I think this whole thing about new artists, which I want to get into with you, is something that pushed me to understand better the paradigm that we're in today. And is that paradigm, number one, sufficient? Is it, and although it may not be historically accurate to the way we did things, is it not just as viable? And so those are the philosophical questions that I found myself chasing since our conversation.
Great.
Thanks, Doug.
You're welcome.
And you were such a good spirit about that I absolutely do want to get into it. First, though, so you had Sundae Sound.
Yes.
And so after Sundae Sound, and I mean, who went through your doors? There must have been a plethora of artists and bands. And
yeah, quite a few. Ian Tyson recorded several albums there that went gold and platinum. He was on Stony Plain. Let me think about that now. It's been such a long time, because after Sundae Sound we had Canada Cassette, and then which became Canada Disc and Tape, because, you know, we got into CDs, and we did a lot of manufacturing for people like Paul Brandt and George Canyon, Jan Arden, you know, Tegan and Sarah were clients, Feist, when she was in a group before that. So there's a lot of talent that has come through the doors.
Right. And so then you went on to, like you said, Canada Disc and Tape.
Yep.
And that must have really, I'm assuming, solidified some great relationships for you.
Oh, for sure. And we expanded too, from Calgary to Edmonton, and then we had an office in Saskatoon and one in Victoria. And at our peak, we were doing about 1,000 projects a year.
Wow.
Which is a lot.
1,000 recording projects or distribution?
No, yeah, like manufacturing CDs or cassettes and that sort of thing, yeah.
Wow. So you guys were pretty well known, obviously, at least in this geography, for what you were doing.
Yeah, no, we had good clients in Western Canada, and we were a sponsor of the Western Canadian Music Awards at one point, you know, and we sponsored, or one of the many sponsors of Folk Fest and, you know, some of the other festivals, Sled Island, you know, we participated. So anything local, you know, or Western Canada wise, we want to support.
Right, right. And so you have gained, you know, sort of a knowledge and understanding of what not only historically took place, musically speaking, in Canada or in Calgary, but also an ear to what is happening these days.
Well, I know about it because of all the people I've met through the years, you know, because now it's the next generation. It's the kids that are making the music, or maybe the grandkids even, you know. Right. So there are a lot of young people that are out there recording now, you know, in their teens, you know, and 20s. Yeah, and it continues, you know, there's a huge pool of talent. Right.
And that seems quite hopeful in one respect, that there are people still pursuing, and young people pursuing art and music and doing that. And of course, these platforms then would be primarily digitally related?
Yeah, a lot of people are recording digitally now. And it's easy to make videos, you know. Well, I mean, we're doing this with the...
Hey, look at us.
We're using iPhones
right?
to do this, right?
Right.
And with platforms like TikTok, right, have really taken over and helped people become viral. So At one point, the record labels controlled everything. So if you weren't signed to a major label, good luck getting on the radio, because that was your method of exposure before the internet. And then now anybody can get online. But that's it. Kind of poses the other problem, is that everybody's online. So, you have to be really, really good to stand out.
Right. And I suppose in some respects, either really good or really not good.
That's true.
Like a William Hung or something
Wing.
like that. Huh?
Wing.
Tell me about that. I don't know that.
I was telling my friend Jenny, who's a singer-songwriter, about that the other day. I said, you either have to be like Eva Cassidy, where if you listen to Over the Rainbow, and so many people have done that song before, right? And then you listen to it and you go, wow, it's like listening to something new. Like Eva Cassidy is amazing.
Yes.
And then you listen to Wing and you go, okay, she can't sing in tune, has no sense of timing or anything, and yet she has 1 million views on her videos. Like
Right.
she does ABBA covers.
Okay.
You've never heard, you haven't listened to
Well,
it?
I'm going to now. I'm going to have
you
to,
will,
aren't
you
I?
will, yeah.
It's like a car wreck.
Well-
you have to look.
That's right. And so they devoted a whole episode of South Park to her, which only boosted her popularity. She's
Right.
retired now, but it's amazing because, by conventional music standards, she's not good, but she's so not good that she's interesting. So, and there are fans of hers.
And so you wonder, I guess I wonder in terms of, my philosophical bent these days, where that desire for us to support that and to, like a car accident, have to look at that. I can't help but wonder where that comes from.
Probably wrestling.
Go ahead. I don't know that I follow. So.
I think you have the really, really good guys or the really, really bad guys. It's like superhero movies, right? If you're in between, nobody notices. If you're average,
Right.
right? There's so many people who are average.
I get it.
Yeah.
I
So you
get
have
it.
to be outstanding either on one end, you have to be up there, or, you can be like Marilyn Manson or Alice Cooper and really sort of rock the boat on the other end and be controversial. Right?
That's an interesting concept. So, in a sense, kind of what you're saying is you need to be the hero or the villain.
I guess so.
You just can't be the average person walking the street.
Well, you could be a lounge singer.
Wouldn't that be a villain? I mean, come on.
I don't know. Yeah. They don't have lounge singers anymore, do they?
They really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, even the parodies on Saturday Night Live are gone.
Right.
Which is a shame. I mean, come on. The lounge singer was was a species of their
A
own.
good
I think.
character, yeah, for sure.
Which sort of, belies other questions. Do you feel that there, number one, is a vibrancy to live civic music? And does there need to be?
Well, I think because of the advent of the internet and the fact that there's so much choice out there, it's great because everybody can find, it's like going into an ice cream place that has 100 flavors, right? People find what they want, whereas before, a lot of that stuff wasn't available, like it was dictated by the labels, what was out there, what was made available for people to consume. Now it's, people have way more choice. So you can find niche markets, for avant-garde jazz, and be able to listen to it and support that. Whereas before, those musicians probably wouldn't get much of an income.
Right. Absolutely. And I think there's truth to that. I think the fact that we are able to proliferate our music on a greater scale, and less of a censored, meaning that, corporations or whatever were the ones that said yes to one and no to another.
That's right.
So one would be censored when the other one would necessarily not.
Correct.
Now that censorship in that respect doesn't exist because everyone has a platform now to distribute their art.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah. And like, I used this example the other day. I don't know what it's like these days, but way back when, CFAC was a very popular country station here, and their listenership was about 250,000 people. So the logic of going into the studio, like if you went and performed in a club every night to reach 250,000 people. If a club held 250 people, you'd have to play 1,000 nights. And different people would have to come in every single night for you to reach that much of an audience, right? Now, you make a recording, well, back then, put it on the radio, 250,000 people hear it. Maybe 250 people like it, and all the rest of those people think your music stinks. But those 250 people will go down to the club, and it'll be full. So as far as the club owner is concerned, you're a hit, even though 99.9% of the people don't like your music.
Right.
They don't care, right? Because their club is full.
I see what you're saying. And so in a way, you're also saying that is the way to populate the club itself. So it's just not about being online or about creating in your bedroom. It's about maybe going through that process so that you can introduce your music to a live public, to real people in real time, instead of just relying on the cold nature or antiseptic nature of the internet itself.
Well, it's exposing your music, right? So there's two ways of doing it. You can either play live for a lot of gigs, or you can be out on the internet, or in the past on the radio, and randomly so many people will hear you. And then if those people decide to follow you, you know, like whether they're Instagram followers or TikTok followers, you find your audience, or I guess your audience finds you. But the ability for the audience to find you now is much better than it was in the past. You know, I mean, if you were an obscure artist, you know, a friend of mine, Tono Ohama, was from Rainier, and he created synth music back in the day. And he gained some popularity and released quite a few albums and stuff. And now, with the advent of, well, the internet's been around for a long time. When I say advent, I sound really old. but now, you know, with the internet, you know, lots of people have the access to that music, and then people can pick and choose who they want to follow.
Right. And one thing that sort of got me philosophically about what we were talking about internet phenoms and people having 6 million views and this sort of thing, although great for the individual themselves and a way to popularize themselves individually, what was that doing for the greater community? That was my question. That was posed in my head after our conversation.
Yes.
And so I've thought about that. And even so far, as I asked a good friend of mine, do we really need community? Do we really need it? And I asked that as a sincere question.
Yeah.
You know, is it that in the future, perhaps, a type 1 civilization or whatever, will we actually need community? And his argument was for community, that we would need community.
We do have community, but it's not one large community per se. It's a whole bunch of you know, it's like you have people who like crafting, you have people who like sailing, you have people who like rock climbing, right? So, I mean, think of them as different forms of music.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So the people that like that type of music, you know, there's a community behind it. So if you go out to some of the gigs at Sled Island, there's a community there. Conventional older musicians, you know, may not go there, right? People who like Barry Manilow wouldn't be going down to Broken City. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a community there.
Right.
Yeah.
And it also means that I'll be going to Broken City.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's not that the individual creating music in their bedroom or whatever are staying there. They're creating there.
Yes, that's
and
right.
then proliferating outside of that.
Correct.
And outside of the necessarily cold or, you know, steel environment of the internet itself. And so that, for me, seems like a hopeful thing.
Yeah, it is.
That if we can proliferate in that respect, and not only that, you know, I think a thought that just came to my mind is that our ways of proliferation have become personalized in a sense. You know, so that we don't necessarily need the corporatocracy of industry and things like that to take care of that issue or to hide us from the general public.
Right, right.
Right.
Exactly. Again, back in the day, a lot of radio stations were independent, or maybe one or two stations were owned by the same company. So what happened was, if you had a country music artist, you would hit all the country stations with the 45 and try to get airplay. And different program directors would say yes or no. So there was an opportunity for you to break a record in a certain market if other people didn't play it, but somebody, say, in Red Deer played it, and then it got some traction, and then maybe Calgary would change their mind and they would play it, and Edmonton would play it, right? And then you'd have a good audience for it. Now what happened was corporations started buying up these stations. And then what happened was they'd go, well, okay, we own 10 country and western stations. Now, do we need 10 guys deciding what music to play? No, let's fire 9 of them, and we're going to put their salaries in our pocket. And you found that happening with media now. The newspapers, the Sun and the Herald, are owned by the same company, right?
Right.
Yeah. And for a while, there was problems with the fact that they would be using articles written by certain writers for a local market in all their newspapers and not compensating them for it. Much like Facebook and Google are now being taken to task for using news articles and not compensating, the publishing industry for it.
Right.
And there's legislation and stuff.
Uh-huh.
So that has changed the nature of radio to the point where if one person decides what everybody hears in Canada, you're going by that person's taste. Whereas with the internet, you can pick and choose.
You can choose.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder if what you're saying, because what you're saying sounds very good and it sounds very hopeful. I guess, the skeptic in me, and it's, I have to say right now that it's okay to be skeptical.
Yes,
we've lost that ability to be skeptical.
Always question.
Right.
Yeah.
So the skeptical part of me, or the philosophical part that might pose a question, might say, is there any necessary problem with what it is we're being posed today? I certainly see what you're saying, and I think that in respect to us taking back control for ourselves in this respect, which the internet has given us, the ability to proliferate our stuff, and to keep that sort of uncompromised from the things that have taken over, the things that you talked about.
Yes, but the problem now is, again, like the companies that bought up all the media, and all the radio stations and stuff. I mean, who are the gatekeepers now? The owners of Google, the owners of Facebook, which also own Instagram, WhatsApp, and so on and so forth. They can censor you. I mean, look at Elon Musk buying Twitter.
Right.
If you're critical of him, well, you have your Twitter account very long, right? So now we're into dark territories here.
Well, I think we certainly were into dark territory before Elon.
Yeah.
And no one, I think, knows what is necessarily to happen in the epoch of Elon.
Right.
I don't know that anybody can answer that question. I know that as far as if the news is correct, he just fired half of his workforce,
Yes.
4,000 people.
Yeah.
And I heard a story on the news today that Facebook has fired 13% of their workforce, or they're about to, because they're not making the profits they need to. Now, to me, there seems like that seems like an oxymoron, because the owner of Facebook is one of the richest people in the world. So how much do you need?
Right.
And what does it mean when you say that your revenues are not what they should be?
Yes.
What are you going for?
Right.
And at what expense are you going for it? Because you're firing 13% of your workforce in order to keep more for who? Them? No, they're losing their job.
Right.
For you, perhaps? or for the people that invest in your company?
Yes.
And when is enough enough? And that's another question that you pose, which is who are going to be the gatekeepers? And that, I think, is one of the questions that I have, meaning that right now, are we the gatekeepers necessarily of ourselves in respect to the way we live today? And if we are, or we're not, or we are and we're not, then what happens? Yes, when, you know what I mean? When someone wants to censor you, they can. And where someone, you told me about 5 or 6 local artists that have like 6 million hits.
Oh, yeah, way more.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what happens if they don't like Elon, or they don't like Zuckerberg, or they, you know what I mean?
Right.
Or they're against, pharmaceutical company, or you know what I mean? Or corporatocracy is too much for them.
Yeah.
Or they have a different thought about it. So yeah, I think that is maybe the question, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can still build your own website, but how do you get people to come to it, right? And so, people have gravitated toward social media like Facebook and these platforms in order to gain viewership and so on and so forth. But that also hands the power over to those companies to decide who gets looked at and who doesn't get looked at. And it's kind of back to square one.
Well, no, I was just going to say that. We're kind of back to square one then, aren't we? Like we're back to the way we've always done things. So even though things are new, they're still old and archaic in terms of the way we're structuring those things, perhaps. Is that what you're saying?
I think you should start your own social media platform.
Hey, here's the thing, Doug, is that number one, you don't know somebody until you get an opportunity to know them at all.
Yeah.
And, through this podcast, I've realized that even though we might look at certain things differently, or we might have a different take, or, you explain a certain thing to me and I understand it better and I judge it less. Most of the people that I have on this podcast, really, we all tend to think the same. That people are not the thing to blame. That perhaps the way we do things and the systems in which we underpin our society and the way that we, operate is the thing that needs to be looked at. Not the people, not the humanity of each and every one of us, but the way in which we do things and how we perhaps shift our power. But these dialogues, the ones that I have with you and other people, necessarily help or pose the question, is there any way for us to do that ourselves?
Now you're getting into the philosophical part.
Right?
Right?
Do you have anything to say about that, though?
Well, the big problems are ego and greed, right? How do you circumvent that with people? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. People who care more about themselves than the community. So.
No, that's good. I'm not sitting here quietly in judgment of that statement. I'm sitting there,
contemplate, right?
Right. I'm sitting here contemplating the statement.
Yeah.
Because in a sense, I tend to, it's hard to not agree with that statement, because as part of our human nature, we certainly possess the ability to be selfish, to be, I know narcissistic is thrown around way too much these days, but, to be any one of those things, the nefarious and exclusionary.
Right. Yeah.
And so, what is the answer to that? Because that is a part of human nature, and that's not something, if the nature does exist, we're not close enough to it yet to actually understand that. Right. So we have to deal in some sort of reality, correct? And so that reality would then pose the question, what do you do? And I think that's a fair question. I was having a conversation with a few people, and this one guy kind of spoke up, and he said, that's a lot of what ifs. And I thought about that, and immediately I felt this judgment, self-judgment come upon me. Like, yeah, man, that is a lot of what ifs. And then I thought, but isn't that what philosophy did before science? Is it ask the question, what if? And then science went about to prove or disprove the what if. You know, Neil Armstrong or the people that made the spaceship that took us to the moon had to have, somebody had to say what if.
Yeah, Orville and Wright. What if we could fly?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So these questions, I think, are valid.
Absolutely.
The two words of what if, I think, are very valid. And so I didn't judge myself any further once I started to figure that, the answer to that. You know, I've talked to certain people and I've wondered about, and have not come to conclusion yet, but wondered about what would a system look like? And of course I take art because that's my discipline. And what would it be that we thought about a structure that worked for the least to, let's say, the most, although when I say the most, maybe that's just the most curated, not the most special. Because I think it is that speciality that may get in the way and lead to the things you're talking about. So I've thought about this. If you have a foundation of, let's say, education, and I'm talking about in physical terms here, and I'll try and give a physical example for this, like a sphere or a circle of life or something like that.
Yeah.
And so you have a foundation of education, and the young in particular, right, where they are educated on their discipline, whether it's drumming or guitar playing or painting or anything. And from there, you have you have some form of creation and maybe civic proliferation. So you go to a club and you play, or you're on the internet and you show people, you know, your wares or your creations, and then you take them to a club or whatever, and you play them on a civic level like that, or maybe a provincial level or a state level, whatever it is. And then from there, you have maybe the high level proliferation that is maybe both national and international. So the very top echelon of mastery now, not personality, but mastery at the top of that. However, there is some sort of regulatory, and I use that term cautiously because I don't mean that some individual or even necessarily individuals are making that decision, that it is a decision by the greater community that nothing becomes so great above that level of mastery, because all we know is international proliferation. We're not playing on Mars yet. So that once we get to that level, that no one gets rapaciously rich or can make so much money that it ends up hurting the very foundation of that thing that you've created that produces the great works. And I've thought about this circle that where if money is generated or all those things, and that's not to say that a person in education doesn't get something, that a person on civic proliferation and creation on a civic level to make their city healthy doesn't get more subsistence or is benefacted something for that, and that at the top there isn't more given to those individuals. However, it never gets so rapacious that ends up hurting the very foundation.
Well, I know what you're saying, because when you look at the salaries of the CEOs of all the major corporations, many of them make an obscene amount of money, way more than they need, right? Now, granted, a lot of them donate money back to charity and foundations, which is really good. So, but I understand what you're saying about the differences and things.
Right. And I don't think that that's necessarily a revelation. I had a conversation with a buddy of mine about a week ago, and we were talking about that old thing, if a tree falls in the forest, doesn't make a sound. And he said, I don't think it does. And his statement was somewhat, to him, it sounded profound, like he had figured it out.
Yeah.
And I thought, what is so exceptional about that statement? Like, is there anything exceptional that he's saying? And I thought, no, there isn't. The fact that we don't understand science
Right.
is the thing that is exceptionally
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
We know that scientifically that the vibration that a falling tree makes
Yeah.
is the thing that we pick up on in terms of
Yeah.
the sound nature of that.
Yeah.
And so, does it make a sound? Well, here's the other part of that: is that I don't know that we know if it makes a sound or not. But the fact that scientifically it's unremarkable that we would think that would make a sound to the human ear when there's no human ear to hear it.
You can put a recording device there and then listen to it later, and it did make a sound. So
Well, absolutely, but once again, that's still vibration.
you're correct.
Yeah, you're still picking up on the diaphragm and the vibration of the diaphragm.
But it's awfully egotistical of humans to say, if I'm not here to listen to it or look at it, it doesn't exist. Things do exist. And I had this discussion with someone the other day. If humans were wiped off the face of this planet because of COVID, what would happen? Would the planet cease to exist? Nope. It would continue, the animals, the plants, probably a lot better shape without all the pollution and all the other things that we're doing to this planet, right?
And there's the duality of the statement itself.
Yeah.
So there are some things that we know in terms of those things being experiential. So we do know that it would take a human ear to hear a sound. But we don't know the fact that whether it's a sound or not, the impact of that tree would still have impact on the things around it. And that we are of no consequence to that.
Yes, we are of no consequence.
And that's what you're saying.
I am saying that, yeah.
And so that is the duality of this whole thing. And I think you're absolutely correct that in some ways, I think we take ourselves far too seriously.
Oh, absolutely. And, and here again is, when we talk about music and sound and stuff, what dictates what is good? We talked earlier about Wing, she's popular, but conventional musicians would say she's not singing in tune, she has no sense of timing, and yet she has fans. They love her music. So what's to say she isn't correct and the 99 other percent are wrong?
Well, and once again, this comes back to philosophy, because a philosopher necessarily, for the most part, but not in every case, but in almost every case, enough to make it almost entirely true, but nothing can be entirely true. It would be that you would take lead from someone who is an expert in their field. And so once again, that's something that we've forgotten, personal taste aside, I'm saying, right? I can feel the way I do about COVID, but I would rather hear from somebody that maybe knows something about it. But there again is another duality because of what we've experienced with COVID itself, and the fact that even truth and science can necessarily lead us astray for other reasons that nefarious ones that you and I have touched on, which is another, right?
Yeah, when you were saying that, this ad popped into my head from back in the 50s. As a doctor with a cigarette going, 9 out of 10 doctors prefer Chesterfield.
Right.
Going, okay, here are the experts speaking.
Exactly. Exactly. So in respect to that, which is just another philosophical point, the fact that we can only know what we do know, and the fact that knowledge is not 100% always known and granted to us as individuals, and that's the humility I think you're trying to propose, is the fact that we think that we are so important to the universe itself that without us, it just doesn't exist. And that's only true of our own reality.
That's right,
Right?
Yeah.
The fact
it
that
doesn't exist for us.
Right. The fact that I know I'm thinking is the fact that I know I'm real. But outside of that, I really know nothing.
Yeah.
Right?
And it goes back to what you said earlier, question everything.
Right. And I'm so glad I have somebody with me today that understands that. That is so refreshing. And this is the dialogue I think that I love. And I want to get back to, because here's the other thing too, is I think that artists are far wiser, smarter, intuitive, interesting, opinionated than they necessarily give themselves credit for. And so having these conversations, having these discussions, maybe, perhaps, God forbid, have a town hall where we can all sort of share ideas and maybe come up with the ideas of how to mitigate. If we have Elon Musk and we have Twitter and we have all these platforms that I suppose historically have shown us don't always have our best interests at heart. How is it that you and I and our neighbors and our brothers and our sisters have our best interests at heart? That no one necessarily take advantage of another, and that we all produce a work or a platform that can work for all of us. I know that sounds lofty. It may sound romantic and idiotic, but I don't think the question itself is.
Well, I think it's very idealistic, which is good. It's like people who form political parties. They have all these wonderful idealistic goals. And at the beginning, it's all good. And then something goes sideways. And then another one forms, another one forms. So you've had these other platforms before. MySpace, remember MySpace?
Right.
I don't know what happened to it. It's gone. Facebook came over and now Snapchat for a while, TikTok. And there'll be other platforms in the future. As people get disenchanted, the public goes, okay, we see something going wrong here. Somebody is going to start something else, and the people will gravitate toward it.
That's why I'm looking to the public, to you and me and my brothers and my sisters, to have a voice themselves, and to discuss maybe, these certain kinds of platforms. I know that sounds political. I know it may even sound like everything else we've always ever done. But at this point, I don't know what is better than dialogue and having it.
Right.
It's sitting here with you today.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. The other question is, why are some genres of music more popular than others? Boy, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? If we could figure that one out.
Well, I have an immediate sort of take on it.
Okay.
I can't say that it's an answer.
Yeah.
But I would say that primarily, it is my conjecture that every person on the planet is creative, unless mindfully they are maybe unaware.
Yeah.
Other than that, every person is necessarily born with with a spirit of creativity, whatever spirit means in this respect. The fact that we don't pursue our loves, that we do fall to the behest of having to answer customer service for another person, other company, or other people to get rich, or their creativity, I think is kind of a shame, because I think we all possess creativity and we can all make an impact. We can all change the world. And I don't think that's conjecture or hyperbole. I think it's true. I'm not the drummer that I am today because I didn't go and pursue my love of something. We don't necessarily do that as a people, by and large. And so because of that, we lose touch with perhaps following a thing to become masterful of that thing. There are ways of constructing something where you can simplify something for someone to get it. So why would pop be more popular than jazz? Well, I would say because it's easier to understand. The mind can make better sense of simplicity than it can necessarily whatever is not simple. Jazz to me is not simple. I mean, I used to play arrangements.
Right.
And I almost got fired once because the lady said, if he keeps playing drums that way, nobody's going to be able to dance.
Oh,
and
right.
I thought, but that's one of my guilty pleasures.
That's funny.
I dummied it down,
Yeah.
and I played 2 and 4.
Okay.
But just within that, I think is somewhat of an explanation, if I can be so bold, as to why some things are more popular or why they gravitate to people more than other things. When you make science simple for people, people can understand it. Therefore, they can, if you want to say consume it, which I hate to say, but they can consume it better. They can, right? Partake.
More palatable.
More palatable. Jazz is not. Jazz is angular. Jazz and other forms, I'm not just saying jazz, but other forms of music and art challenge convention. They challenge what it is we do know, and they pose a question, which is, are you going to understand this? Are you going to get this? It's a higher concept. Can you get it? Some people say, well, I don't want to. I just want to be fed.
I find it interesting looking back that, you know, in the 40s, big bands were really popular. You know, and then 50s, you know, Elvis was popular, and then the Beatles, you know, and you know, the heavy metal bands came along, and you know, and then disco, you know, and you know, and there's R&B and all this kind of stuff. So as time goes on, you know, like back in the 40s, if you had released an Elvis Presley record, would they all be staring at you like, wow, there's a blue monkey, right?
Absolutely.
So what is it about the timing of when these things happen, culturally, how things evolve, and personal taste in fashion? Because you look at all these wonderful, I have a friend that's down in Cuba right now, sent me these pictures, and I go, look at those beautiful cars. Look at what we have now, right? Mm-hmm. I love those cars.
Meaning
right?
From the 50s and
yeah,
the old Thunderbirds. And,
I mean, you know, there was an embargo, so they couldn't get parts, and you know, so they had to keep fixing the old cars. They're wonderful, you know. But maybe it's because I'm from that era that, you know, I think those cars look great. You know, do people now, kids growing up, look at those cars and go, what monstrosities? Or do they go, wow, why don't we have cars like that now? I don't know. But things change. They keep evolving all the time. Music, culture, all of that kind of stuff. And it's anybody's guess why, you know, that this happens. Because, you know, I mean, I still go out and listen to Johnny Summers. I love the group, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but, you know, back in the 40s, that was really popular. Things, you know, for the general public have changed. Yeah.
There will always be change. There will always be progression, unless, of course, we stop that nihilistically from happening. And even then, nature itself will continue to grow.
So as a drummer, you would have to play that kind of music and then do, you know, doo-wop and then do disco, you know, in order to keep working, right?
Yes, absolutely. You know, that you would have to. Of course, you know, now the argument being that, you know, a lot of music is electronic, which is sans the instrumentalist anyway. So, you know what I mean? Doesn't need a drummer.
I remember Sin drums.
The Linn drum, yeah.
No, the Sin drums.
Well, the Sin drums as well.
They were on like every record for about 6 months, and then nobody liked them anymore.
Right. Well, the Linn drum, you know, it's funny, Stuart Copeland actually interviewed the Linn. His last name is Linn.
Oh yeah, Roger Linn.
Roger Linn. Yeah. And his first question, and it was tongue in cheek, but there was some truth to it. Yeah. He said, "So, how does it feel to have wrecked music?" And of course they laughed. Yeah. And because it was a joke, but it wasn't. Yeah. There was some truth to it.
There was.
And they both knew that sitting in the room together.
For sure.
So, but yes, I mean, you know, growth and moving on and mastery. To me are the most, I don't know, the greatest pursuit that I can think of is to follow your heart, what you love, and to give everything to that. God knows I've eaten enough Kraft Dinner in my lifetime to be the, you know, spokesman. Absolutely. But I've taken on that mantle. Yeah. To me, that is more important than the proliferation or the commercialization. Is the mastery of that thing. And I know, you know, Nietzsche, he absolutely believed that art was the greatest pursuit one could do.
And there are so many forms of art. During the film fest, I watched a documentary about a guy who designed his own Pez dispensers. And there's a whole community of people that collect these things. It's just amazing. Like, I had no idea that it existed.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and that's art. Like, you know, I mean, other people who do paintings might not look at it as art, but it's art.
I was watching an interview today with a doctor, and he said, let doctors practice their art. And I thought that's so, and this was the inventor, one of the inventors of the mRNA vaccine.
Right.
And I won't go into what he was talking about. it's not my point. My point is that he considered, health and wellness to be art.
Yes.
And I think it is.
Yeah.
Once again, that's why I think that we can all create. And
Yes.
we all should create.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And we shouldn't leave it up to that guy, or that guy should get paid for it.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't, touch it. We are all creative in our own ways, and understanding that about us as a civilization and a people and a human race, I think is the most important job we have.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree.
This was definitely a different interview than our first one.
Oh, for sure.
And of course
way more
that one,
philosophical. Yeah.
way more, but
Yeah.
but not ridiculous philosophicalness.
No.
I know that's not a word, but
Yeah.
I think we're humble enough to go, we don't really know what we're talking about. But it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to talk about things you don't understand.
Mm-hmm. It's wonderful to have a conversation with you. You're an interesting fella.
Well, and I'm sure you mean that benevolently.
Yeah. Well, no,
I thank you for coming in again today.
Oh, you're welcome.
For today.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. And is there anything you want to say, like in terms of anything you're going to be doing, any projects you're doing, anything like that?
Well, at the risk of sounding corporate,
Okay. Yeah.
there was a slogan that Nike had, just do it.
Just do it.
So many people sit back and think, one day I'm going to write that play. One day I'm going to learn how to play a piano or whatever. Just go out and do it.
More than advice, wisdom. I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much. Thank you all for hanging with, a bunch of philosophical nuts.
Thanks, everybody.
And
Appreciate being here.
Absolutely. And I hope you all come back for the next one. I'm thinking about some things and honoring some people in this city that I really feel need honoring. And some of those people that we didn't get to, Doug, about, that are online, the 6 million views.
Oh, yeah.
Some of those people I want to interview as well. Some of the younger generation coming up. How do they feel? What do they think? What's important to them? What isn't important to them? I think those things are important to me.
Yes, it'd be great to get them in here for sure.
Totally. So thank you all so very much, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
All right.
That was good.
Dude.
Hey.
Yeah. That was so
It
awesome.
stayed in record. This is awesome.